Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Dr. Kelly Victory, filling in for Dr. Drew. I'm told that Dr. Drew and Susan are not out partying and vacationing. They actually have been working on the East Coast and are traveling back, I believe, to the West Coast today. So I have the good fortune to fill in for Drew. So much has been going on. Boy, what a start to an administration. It's only mid-August. And I feel like it's about four or 5 years worth of a normal administration in these first 8 months. Certainly a lot happening on the international scene, but also a lot happening in healthcare. And that's obviously what I'm here to talk about today. People ask me all the time why I am still focused on and why I talk all the time still about COVID, about the pandemic debacle, about vaccines and about mRNA. Why don't I just move on? It's, behind us. We're now coming in almost up to the year 6 since the pandemic started in 2020. And here's why. Here's my defense of that. Number one, because the old adage, I believe, is true. If you don't know your history, it is doomed to repeat itself. And I think it's important that we really get it right the next time. Secondly, it's because I feel an obligation to continue to educate people and to expose them to the reality, to the real data, to the real information that had been suppressed for, much of these past years. And also, because in Kelly Victory's world, there is no moving on without accountability. And thus far, we really have not seen any true accountability. We've had a lot of exposure of the fraud, the corruption, the abject lying, the pure evil. We have, Anthony Fauci and Rochelle Walensky and Deborah Birx on the record acknowledging that they lied about things, that they knew that the masks didn't work and that social distancing was made up. They knew that the vaccines hadn't been adequately tested and on and on. But there hasn't been any real accountability. So I am super thrilled today to be joined by a colleague and someone I consider a friend, a titan. And that is not hyperbole to use in this COVID issue and in the entire sort of platform of medical freedom. And that's Dr. Ryan Cole. I'll give him a more formal introduction when I come back after the break. But when I say titan, I really mean that. Ryan Cole was, along with me and frankly, a handful of people early on in the pandemic who came out to speak truth. There are lots and lots of people on the train now on the right side of history. But the reality is, in those early days that many people forget, it was me, it was Ryan Cole, Peter McCullough, Pierre Corey, Zev Zelenko, a handful of people. And Ryan Cole, God knows, certainly took it on the chin, as did I and some others, with regard to the assaults, the threats, the ridicule, derision, the censorship. And frankly, that's how it is that I came to be on this show with Dr. Drew. Drew was good enough to give me a platform when I had been stripped of my voice elsewhere. And Ryan Cole certainly has a special place to me in history for people who had the courage to stand up, to speak out, and to do the right thing when it really mattered and when it really cost. So when I come back after the break, I'll give a more formal introduction of his credentials, and we'll get into the weeds on mRNA, what's going on with HHS, the continuing issues with vaccines, and a lot of other stuff. So see you in a minute.
Our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say. I've spent most of my career dealing with illnesses that shorten life, and now we have ways to extend it and extend wellness. I've been working with the team over at V-Shred to develop a product that has everything I want in a longevity supplement. NR Boost has nicotinamide riboside. You know how metal can rust? Well, your body behaves in a similar way. It's mediated through something called NAD. NAD falls as we age, so we're less able to fight off that oxidative process. We oxidize much like that metal. And NAD fights it, but nicotinamide riboside elevates NAD so we can push back on those oxidative stressors, improving health, improving longevity. The other product is Senosync, has fisetin, one of the key molecules to fight off zombie cells, and we've added resveratrol to that, which is a well-known anti-aging antioxidant again. I don't like supplements that have a ton of ingredients. To me, it suggests that none of it's working. When I prescribe a medication, I prescribe that medicine because I expect that to work. That is exactly what I've done with these products. And I want you to go to drdrew.com/vshredmd for 10% off. Again, that is drdrew.com/vshredmd.
Welcome back. As I said, I am super thrilled to have Dr. Ryan Cole as my guest today on the show. Ryan has been on the show in the past. In fact, I brought him on as one of my early guests when I started doing the show with Dr. Drew. He was one of the people in my Rolodex who I said was a truth teller and someone who had tremendous integrity. He exposed a lot then, and over these past years has continued to learn more and more and expose all of that data. Dr. Cole is a double board certified pathologist, Mayo trained. He has a specialty in dermatopathology, pathology of the skin. He also has a very, very deep background in virology and immunology. He ran an independent pathology clinic in the state of Idaho for 2 decades. He now serves as an expert consultant, an expert witness. He's testified in front of Congress and the Senate, multiple state senates, and in front of the European Parliament. He has been on the record, and as I said, did so early on when it really cost him. On top of all of that, he's the consummate Renaissance man. He's a woodworker, a musician, an organic farmer. We were just talking about that before we came on the show. He also happens to be the father of 6 daughters. God help him when when the marriage proposals start coming in. But all around great guy, and I'm thrilled to have you. Thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Dr. Victory, always a pleasure and an honor. And thank you for those very kind words. And Titan, I don't know about. I'm just grateful to be able to speak the truth where I can, when I can. And I'm very humbled by that. Thank you.
No, I really do mean that, and I think you have been steadfast. And there are lots of people now on board, but those early days, it's easy to forget those. Those early days were tough. I know they took a toll. They took a toll on people financially, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, and I give you a lot of credit for staying in the fight. I think there's a special place for those of us who did. I want to talk about a lot of things today, but I really would like to, just sort of dump all over mRNA to start with. Let's talk a little bit about mRNA. A lot of people have this misconception that, mRNA is one of these things that's been around for a long time. Scientists we've been using it for decades, and that is simply not the case. Scientists have been studying it for a long time, but talk a little bit about let's talk about mRNA and from your perspective, why it isn't the ideal platform and certainly not the ideal platform for respiratory viruses.
Certainly. So let's start with the basics. What does M in the mRNA mean? It means message. And our cells all day long, we're making messages inside our cells. And the message comes off of a little, it's coded from our DNA into a little strand of messenger RNA. And it says, hey, we need to make some protein right now. We need an enzyme. We need to make some bones, some muscles, some GI enzymes, some skin cells, whatever the protein is that the cell needs at that moment. It says, okay, here's the message, let's make it. And then kind of like Mission Impossible, after a few minutes to a few hours, depending on how much protein is needed, that message self-destructs. Well, what happened with this entire COVID debacle and the shots and the COVID shots was we were told that it was messenger RNA, no problem. Well, it's not. It's a modified synthetic RNA. So in RNA, the base pairs that we learn about, we have 4 base pairs in our DNA and 4 base pairs in RNA. And one of those was substituted. The uridine was substituted with what's known as N1-methyl pseudouridine, which is synthetic. Right. But it's not that they just replaced a few of those. They replaced every single uridine in this message. So this message doesn't self-destruct. It persists in the body for a long time. And there are multiple peer-reviewed studies now that prove that. But the bad idea about mRNA as well is the package in which they put it, this little fat bubble, this lipid nanoparticle, is very nonspecific and goes everywhere in the body, to the liver, to the bone marrow, to the brain, to the heart, to all the organs of the body. The reproductive organs is where it concentrates. And then this foreign synthetic, we could even say genetically modified, sequence, GMO, and everybody's supposedly anti-GMO, yet billions of people volunteered to receive a GMO into their arm. Anyway, so they received this synthetic RNA. We can talk about all the problems that induced, but the technology isn't targeted. It doesn't stay in the arm. It does go everywhere. And it makes a protein for an unspecified amount of time and in unspecified quantities. So some people were like mega factories of making a spike protein. And for whatever reason, other people did break it down. And so there was just no science behind, when we use drugs in medicine, we know the therapeutic dose, how long, the half-life of it, et cetera. We know how long it's going to persist and what effect it'll have. And that's why your doctor says, okay, take it twice a day or 3 times a day or once at night. We know how long that drug lasts in the system. But with this modified synthetic product, it goes everywhere and we don't know the on-off switch in any particular individual. And these are all things that should have been studied before it was ever used on humanity, and sadly it wasn't. And then it's
Let me interject for just a second here, just to sort of, because part of my job is to make sure that everybody who's watching this who doesn't have a scientific background is understanding exactly what you're saying. So if we unpack a little bit of this, the fact that they put in this synthetic is because mRNA by itself, left to its own, is really very fragile. It breaks down, as you said, very, very quickly. And in order to not have it break down quickly, they put in this synthetic component. And when they tried it, both Moderna and Pfizer tried initially to only substitute 25% of the uridine with pseudouridine. And that didn't work. It didn't make it last long enough. So then they did 50%. And ultimately, as you said, they ended up substituting 100% of the uridine with the synthetic. And therefore, it didn't break down, and it doesn't break down. And the normal enzymes in the body, the normal breakdown process didn't work. So it sticks around, causing our cells to produce that spike protein that it's coded for in perpetuity, perhaps. We simply don't know. And as you rightly point out, they didn't do that study ahead of time. People ask me, and I'm sure they ask you every day, well, when will it stop? And the answer is, we don't know. And neither do they. I mean, how scary is that? And then Drew and I did a whole show, probably 3 years ago, on the dangers of lipid nanoparticles. So you just touched on those little fat globules that are sort of the carrier that helped to get the mRNA into the cell. It was well known, is my understanding, and you as a pathologist would know better than I, that the toxicity of lipid nanoparticles by themselves, independent of mRNA, was well known, is my understanding.
Correct. Yeah, they're very hyper-inflammatory, and there's even interesting carcinogenic potential in some of those fats, those lipids that were used. And interestingly, if you look even at the safety data on those and the safety data sheets, it says these are not intended for human use. Or veterinary use. They're for research purposes only. And yet they were combined with these synthetic sequences to protect them,
Right.
and went into billions of people. And now they're using them on animals as well. And again, it clearly states on their safety sheets, don't use these for anything other than research purposes. I want to add one more thing on the synthetic RNA. And this was a big study that came out of Cambridge and Oxford and Dr. Mulroney et al. That showed not only, okay, so back to basic science, when you're making a protein is made up of amino acids, and amino acids take 3 of these little base pairs, whether it's a CTG or whatever it is, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, makes a bunch of amino acids stringed into a protein. This platform that they used, they found it slips. So if you have a couplet of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and it slips to 2 and starts reading there first, now you get 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, or 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. Or, like instead of a sentence of 3-letter words like the dog ate the cat, you take the T off the front, and now it's hey dog get the cat. It makes a nonsense sentence. Basically, what this means is you're also coding for Frankenstein proteins, which may be functional, which may be triggering autoimmune reactions. You're making proteins in addition to the supposed spike protein. You're making unintended but potentially consequential proteins that can cause the immune system also to go haywire. So this was found out a couple years into the rollout of the shots, and these very esteemed researchers said, Houston, we have a problem here.
Yeah, I think people might not understand if you don't have a medical background that if your immune system, a healthy immune system, a big part of its job is to recognize things that are foreign and to mount a response to that, an attack. Say, oh, that's a foreign invader. I don't recognize that. That is not something that's part of me. Attack it. When you inject a foreign protein, and that's what these are, or start creating foreign proteins within your cells, that your body says, that is not self, I'm going to attack it. That is not something that is natural or normal. And that's so all of these autoimmune responses, the fact that your own immune system begins to attack cells, attack organs, attack all of we know that mRNA, as you said, didn't stay in the deltoid muscle in the arm. It went to every single organ system that now starts producing a new protein, in this case, the spike protein primarily, but also potentially these Frankenstein proteins. What, a healthy immune system is going to do exactly that. It's going to start to attack, say, whoa, that's not normal, which is why we see inflammation of the heart, of the nerves, of the lungs, of the brain, of everything. All of these, as I said, we ended up with an epidemic of the itises. Neuritis, myocarditis, pericarditis, all of the itises, the inflammatory things that went on. So, let's pivot just a little bit to our friend. We both know Robert Kennedy Jr., the current Secretary of HHS. I am very fond of him. I have the highest respect for him. And despite the fact that nothing in Washington ever happens as quickly as I would like it to, we are making headway. He is making consequential headway. And one of the things that just happened recently was he withdrew the funding for multiple different research projects and development of mRNA vaccines, specifically for respiratory viruses. Unfortunately, he didn't stop all mRNA platforms, but he stopped them with regard to, do you want to talk a little bit about why mRNA is, or frankly, any vaccine technology for a respiratory virus hasn't been successful thus far?
Well, I think an important thing is if you're trying to protect the airways, why would you inject something into the system? We're exposed to pathogens. We inhale them through the nose, the mouth, or it gets into our eyes. And we have a different immune response in this area of our body. And we make a very special protein in that area called, or an antibody called secretory IgA. And it's like these little brooms. So when we're exposed to things, these little brooms just start to bind and mop up really quickly what we're exposed to. the injection of even if it's a normal vaccine into the arm, not even an mRNA type product, you're making a predominance of IgG antibodies, which, in circulation, if a virus or a bacteria or a pathogen gets into circulation, great. But that's not where these viruses attack the body primarily. They attack the respiratory tract. So it's the wrong modality to induce the wrong type of response. And so, it's like putting your archers on the wall, but facing them in the wrong direction. They can shoot all the arrows they want, but it's not going to be very effective in a battle. And we've really used this false construct of, I made antibodies, I must be protected.
Right.
And I like to joke antibodies, schmantibodies. What's far more important is our immediate antibodies are a delayed response. We make antibodies, start making them, a week into an infection, a specific type called IgM, then it switches over to IgG in a week or two or three. What we need is a healthy immune system that's activated strong T cells and macrophages, which are kind of your garbage or your garbage truck Pac-Man cells that come in and mop things up, and your dendritic cells. So we have all these other cells that are our innate immune system. These are the Marines on the front line, the first ones to the scene to fight the battle. And that tends to be ignored, unfortunately, in a lot of science. And so to think that we can immunize against a respiratory disease with a wrong type of product in the wrong part of the body, producing a wrong kind of antibody or protein, is actually scientifically illogical. And yet we've been doing this for centuries. If you go back to the work of Jenner, or even further back in the scraping of, the word vaccine comes from vacca, cow, in the Latin, vaccinia, because they were taking pustules from the cows and scraping people's arms with the pustules from the cows from cowpox, which was similar to smallpox historically. So, we have a history of trying to do something, but not understanding the science behind why we do it. And I think that's what's important. We need to refocus our efforts. If we're going to make an effective vaccine, then we make a mucosal vaccine, something that goes in the nose or the mouth. Now, efforts have been made in that regard. Those have been very unsuccessful as well, because if we could just optimize our immune system and then use early treatments for whatever it may be that comes along, it makes a lot more sense than pretending that we can protect against all these virions in nature, which always mutate anyway. And then our products become infected.
Well, I'm really glad you went down the immunoglobulin road, because I don't think I focus on that enough. I have focused on, my focus on why mRNA was a lousy platform and why we shouldn't even try to develop a vaccine for respiratory virus has been focused for me on the fact that they mutate so quickly. Coronaviruses, rhinoviruses, particularly, you think, they made a vaccine for COVID based on the spike protein, the area of the virus most likely to mutate quickly, so that you're always fighting last year's war. By the time you develop antibodies to that spike protein's long gone. If we could develop a vaccine for the common cold, don't you think we would have done it? There's a reason we don't have a vaccine for rhinovirus. It mutates too quickly. And it's a reason why the vaccine for influenza has, in a really good year, might get around 40-50% efficacy. In most years, it's below 20%. So I'm really glad you went down another huge reason why it's a fail is because we are using the wrong modality, given that it's a respiratory issue, in the first place. But then you hit the nail on the head, I think, with regard to, why is it that we are trying to vaccinate our way to good health? This idea that we can somehow just one more pill, one more vaccine, and we will finally, be healthy, as opposed to all of the things that we should be doing on a daily basis with regard to overall immune health. Have you changed during this whole, I wasn't going to ask you this question, but I will. in this first half, because our other friends, Jeff Barkey and Mark McDonald, asked me the other day on a podcast whether or not I had changed my stance on vaccines in general. I never considered myself to be, quote, anti-vaccine. But I'm interested in whether or not you have changed your overall stance on vaccines over the past years as a result of this experience.
I have become a lot more passionate against this vaccine construct industry. I've received a lot of vaccines in my lifetime. Thankfully, my last one was 1986 when I was in the military, and I haven't had one since then. But, my children got their childhood shots, and then I had one daughter that was injured by the Gardasil shot. And so, at this point, I'm passionately against a construct that isn't based in good science. And I'm pro-good science. It's not that I'm anti-vaccine. It's just vaccines don't have good science behind them. And so again, I receive plenty, knock on wood. I think I'm okay, but I think some of my childhood allergies and asthma were induced by some of the shots I got when I was younger. And in retrospect, having learned what I know now, am very reticent to recommend any to anyone because of basic immunology, because of basic virology, because of just understanding how the human, we're not born vaccine deficient. We're born with we're born with an immune system for a reason. But if we play with it, tinkering with it, thinking that we can make nature better than it is, I think there's a lot of hubris in that construct. And to your point, you're absolutely right. Understanding the world of infectious disease, why do we give fewer antibiotics now than we used to? Because we realized we were developing antibiotic resistance for a lot of organisms. Same construct in vaccinology. If we pressure the organism, especially like what happened during COVID, as an outbreak is happening, you don't vaccinate into that outbreak because you're going to cause more mutations and allow the virus to mutate even faster. And then it's even worse. You're trying to play whack-a-mole at the fair, trying to keep up with whatever variant comes along next, and you're never going to win. And there are very, very few things in nature that stay constant. And I think the whole construct behind the vaccine industry is a false construct. And I think we need to rethink a lot of science. And, you and I were very well educated and have great backgrounds. But a lot of these things we learned after and when we were exposed to what we've gone through recently. And I think what's important going forward, too, is, Secretary Kennedy's done some wonderful things, and he's allowed things that were not talked about to be in the Overton window now. And he's doing great work. The mRNA industry, I think they're scared, and they need to be scared because they know they have a bad technology. They know they have billions invested. They wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for the government, prior administrations making bad choices of funding them. And Moderna wouldn't exist had it not been for the $1 billion from our government given, with no risk. And these industries need to go away. If they had full liability, none of them would have products on the market. And this is what needs to go away, is liability protection. What other industry says, hey, you guys can make something that may work, may not work, may harm people, may kill people, but don't worry about getting sued about it. We got you covered. That's insane. And they're working on mRNA for a lot of other viruses still. And all the problems you and I have already mentioned with it are still there for whatever pathogen comes along. And they think, oh, yeah, we have carte blanche to keep using this new modality. And we already know it doesn't work. And it doesn't matter which protein you put in it, it's going to continue to not work. And this is where...
It's as if...
Go ahead, Kelly.
As I say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's as if every single thing that comes along, I don't care if it's, monkeypox, Zika, whatever it is, the new, tick-borne disease, that all of a sudden we need a vaccine for everything. And it's, clearly being motivated by money and the fact, as you said, they have been given this blanket liability immunity. I don't know about you, but I would not buy a car seat or an iron or a lawnmower that's set on the outside. If you are maimed or killed by this, good luck to you. If it malfunctions and you end up, losing a limb, sorry, there's no recourse. I mean, you wouldn't buy that product, or I certainly wouldn't. But, yet somehow we've allowed this because of the Childhood Vaccine Injury Act that was passed in 1986. The vaccine manufacturers were granted blanket liability as long as their vaccine made it onto the childhood schedule. And I'm teeing this up. We'll take this up after the break because I want to talk about the impact of this. If it's not on the childhood vaccine schedule, what is the liability exposure? But suffice to say, I also, I've had many, many vaccines. I had the standard childhood ones. But the idea that the number that I got growing up was, 6 to 8 from birth to age 18, and that number is now up to 84. If you get all of the recommended COVID vaccines, it would be between birth and age 18, 84 shots. I'm really disheartened to hear that you had a child injured by the Gardasil vaccine. That's one I think that should never have been brought to market. As you said, it was really, really bad science. And there's a whole list of those that we could go on about, like why does a newborn baby need a hepatitis B vaccine on day 1 of life? Just absolute insanity. So we got to go to a commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about that issue of lack of liability and what it means and what we're seeing on the horizon for recent changes.
I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue, and we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15. Weight loss and gum loss, the wellness company's got you covered with new products. Drop. It's for aggressive appetite control. It comes in easy-to-use liquid drops. No prescription, no painful shot. It is an oral peptide called retatrutide. It actually mimics the way the body naturally loses weight, and it is designed to support faster, more focused weight loss when combined with healthy eating and exercise. And Smile is a breakthrough fluoride-free peptide toothpaste. It gently whitens and reverses gum loss, actually rebuilding tissue at its source with a proprietary blend of peptides, remineralizers, and soothing botanicals. Go to drdrew.com/TWC for more information on Drop and Smile, and check out another new and innovative solution for hair loss called Roots while you're there. That's drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off. What's so special about Paleo Valley's grass-fed and finished bone broth and superfood bars? Well, everything. All are delicious, high in nutrients, low in calories, and contain nothing artificial. Co-founder Autumn Smith on what goes into every superfood bar.
So we have bone broth protein powder, and then we've added other superfoods, cashew butter, we have spirulina in there, acerola, broccoli powder, kale, blueberries. And so it really is kind of just an infusion of superfoods with every bite.
And then there's the extraordinary bone broth protein made with an ancestral approach that boosts our collagen intake.
Collagen is something that's gone by the wayside in our modern diet because we don't don't eat nose to tail anymore, but it was something we ate a lot of, and it has so many benefits. So if you have sagging skin, joint pain, gut issues, your decreased bone mineral density, slow to heal your wounds, slow recovery, these are all things that collagen can dramatically improve. If we're not giving our body the building blocks to produce it, we just age more rapidly. It also improves sleep, improves blood sugar control. So it's essentially like the Swiss Army knife of healthy aging.
Like I said, Paleo Valley's bone broth is something special. Make Paleo Valley part of your longevity regimen. Go to drdrew.com/Paleo Valley for 20% off when you subscribe and 15% off your first order. That is drdrew.com/Paleo Valley.
There's nothing in medicine that doesn't boil down to a risk-benefit calculation. It is the mandate of public health to consider the impact of any particular mitigation scheme on the entire population. This is uncharted territory, Drew. Welcome back. I'm here today with Dr. Ryan Cole, pathologist and a champion for integrity and medical freedom, truth teller. We just were talking before the break, Ryan, and where I want to pick back up is on this issue of the impact, frankly, of the 1986 Childhood Vaccine Injury Act and the fact that it granted blanket liability protection to the vaccine manufacturers as long as their shot made it onto the childhood schedule, the recommended schedule that is put together by the CDC. Clearly, that is, part of what caused this explosion in vaccines. Because, if you're a vaccine manufacturer and you have zero liability, the two biggest cost setters for a manufacturer is liability, having, what they have to pay in case they get sued, and advertising. And if it's on the childhood vaccine schedule, you don't have to advertise because it's already on the schedule, so the pediatricians are going to push it. And number two, there's no liability, then everything falls to all the bottom line. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. So recently, just this past, I think, week, the CDC has now said that they have removed the COVID vaccines. They no longer are recommending COVID vaccines for healthy children under the age, I believe, of 5. They're taking it off of the recommended vaccine schedule for healthy children. Despite that, interestingly, the American Academy of Pediatrics is continuing to recommend it. So unpack that for us. Talk a little bit about how you see that playing out.
Well, I see this as really a cabal of fools that are, I'm going to be careful with my words, avaricious, maybe scientifically inept, captured, shall I say pure evil, to think that healthy children need a gene transfection product for a disease that no longer exists. And let me explain that. Because what you explained earlier, COVID mutates so quickly, the shots that are on the market don't cover what's out there right now. The variant that it covers went extinct almost a year ago. So now we have an expired product for an extinct variant, and they want to push it as a gene transfection into children. And they're angry that they can't do it. Well, they're angry because there's a lot of money to be made by individual pediatricians that are incentivized by their insurance companies, their insurance payers. They're incentivized by their healthcare systems. And it's really become a cultish mindset, unfortunately. It's a behavioral genuflection to, oh, look at me, I am the good vaccine giver. And if I give so many, I get the gold star on my forehead and a big gold car in my driveway. And that's the problem. Conflicts of interest are huge, and it has zero to do with health, and it has everything to do with remuneration for either the individual physician and or the hospital or healthcare system, which they're part of. And the American Academy of Pediatrics is captured.
Yeah, I like all the words you used: avaricious, evil, capture. One only needs to go to the American Academy of Pediatrics website and look at their top funders: Moderna, Pfizer, Sanofi. I forget. They're all the top. The top four are pharmaceutical companies. So there's no. Yeah, there you go. Merck. That was the one I was forgetting. Those are their top funders. So if you don't think they're captured, you're really not being honest. And there's, as you said, your average pediatrician makes a lot of money by having, meeting milestones about having, X percentage of their population, their patient population fully vaccinated according to the schedule. So they are pushing these things despite the fact that the science is that these children don't need it. Went to the American Academy of Pediatrics website. They are still pushing the abject falsehood that healthy children are they say from newborn stage 5, are at, quote, the highest risk for COVID. What are you kidding? That is absolutely, children where it's such a de minimis risk from COVID is to be fundamentally indistinguishable from zero. They simply, you could tell me how many pathology reports you did on children, hurt by, we're going to get into the things that you've seen as a pathologist. But the reality is children were not at risk. So I think all the words you used are correct in terms of why they're pushing this. Now, here we get into, if it's not on the CDC's recommended childhood list, does this open them up to liability?
Bingo. And I think that's what's important here is if it's not on that list, now these manufacturers are opened for a lawsuit. And any harms that do happen, not only should they be sued, they should be sued for considerable sums of money. And this is why they hide, because they want to, once you get on that schedule, you are protected as a company. Right. And there's not a lot of margin in a lot of drugs anymore. As things go generic, these companies realize, well, there's big money in vaccines because, number one, they're partially funded by the government, and number two, they don't have that liability they would have as a drug. So, and these at the very most are just a therapeutic. They don't prevent infection. They don't prevent transmission. They don't work, plain and simple. So they should be classified as a therapeutic, and they're not. And, in addition to that, they're a gene product, and they didn't go through the gene regulatory processes. We're not going to see the long-term side effects of these for 10 to 15 years. And that's the really unfortunate aspect, is the genetic harms that are silently occurring in many will manifest down the road.
No, I think truly that is the tragedy. If you're a pediatrician and you're giving a shot to a 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, you're not going to know. We aren't going to that you have. We may see myocarditis or autoimmune issues, but we aren't going to know the extreme impact on fertility, for example, for 25 years or longer. We aren't going to know about long-term carcinogenic properties. We're seeing turbo cancers, but we have no idea what we're going to see down the road in terms of bloodborne cancers and those sorts of things. I certainly hope the American Academy of Pediatrics is being very open with those, their pediatricians in terms of, so that, John Q, Dr. Pediatrics in small town USA knows you're open to liability. You give that kid a shot. It's not on the schedule anymore. And if something goes awry, you could be held liable for giving it. The vaccine manufacturer can be held liable, but I believe that the physicians can be held liable as well. I'm not an attorney, and I'm sure this will get litigated in the courts. But this is a big, big change. So, we want to talk a little bit more about what's going on at HHS and what Robert Kennedy Jr. is doing with regard to the whole vaccine thing, not just withdrawing the funding from this large group of mRNA projects, also, getting the CDC to get the COVID vaccines off the childhood schedule, but the other things. Talk a little bit about the sorts of things you are seeing that are happening that you think are impactful or potentially will make a big difference.
Yeah, well, I'm not in full practice anymore. I had to sell the lab because of all the attacks you talked about earlier. And so now, I have microscope will travel basically, and that's all I'm left with after having 80 employees and the largest independent lab in the Northwest. What does happen with these products, as we mentioned earlier, they persist in the body, and that protein persists in the body in certain patients for a long, long time. And once it binds to certain tissues, whether it's in the brain or in the heart, it induces inflammation, and that inflammation can literally destroy that organ or stop the function of the organ. Large autopsy series out of Japan showed abundant spike protein in multiple parts of the brain. I had seen that in many cases that were sent to me from around the world. The case series from the late great and a good friend, Dr. Arne Burkhardt in Germany, showed in his large series 75% of the deaths that he autopsied were attributable to this spike protein from these COVID injections. Dr. Drew was right early on. It all starts in the blood vessels. The blood vessels would get inflamed. The itis, that inflammation, started on the lining of the blood vessels. And the other chronic problem we're still having, and I kind of helped popularize this term years ago, the clot shot. Unfortunately, because of these Frankenstein proteins and other pathways, we're still seeing years later in many patients large clots. I get reports from colleagues all around the world still to this day. Well, I've got another 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot fibrous clot. And so the amount of harms, the amount of pathological changes in the human body are numerous. I could sit here for hours and enumerate them, sadly. And we're seeing progression of neurologic conditions because of the inflammation in the brain. We're seeing progression of heart failure and heart conditions, actually progression of hardening of the arteries and thickening of the arteries in the heart. So we're seeing an increase in cardiac deaths. We're seeing any organ where these things landed is where harm can be done. I think another critically important one is intrauterine fetal demise or miscarriage and the dropping birth rates, not just here in the US, but around the world. And we can see that spike protein deposited in the testes, in the ovaries. We can see it in the uterus. And then on top of that, the turbocancer issue. I have several cases of cancer where you can see the spike protein in the cancer, and the mechanisms are multiple. I'm a senior fellow with the Independent Medical Alliance, Dr. Merrick, and the Journal of Independent Medicine just posted a really good cancer review article showing the 17 mechanisms by which these shots can cause or trigger cancer pathways. And so that was one of my first observations, got me in a lot of trouble for telling the truth. All I did was make a scientific observation. It's like, hey, if you see something, say something. I saw something, I said something. I said, look, we're doing something new. Here's an observation. You're the pathologist. We're the quality control of medicine. We're the first one to see things.
Absolutely, and you were the person, Dr. Cole, who alerted me to the idea when we talk about, because I was arguing with Dr. Drew about this. We were talking about, yes, the spike protein's the problem, and Drew would always say, well, maybe it's because they had COVID, and you were the person who alerted me to the idea that there was a way to test, quite simply, but nobody was doing it, to differentiate between spike proteins that came from the virus versus spike proteins that were generated in response to the mRNA injections. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, so in the tissue, we use a technique called immunohistochemistry. So we bind an antibody to a protein in a cell and then put a little indicator on the end of it, a little glow light, and we can glow these different colors to tell what protein is present in the cell. So we can identify where the protein is, and then once you identify where the protein is, now you can cut those sections of tissue, and this is the great work of Kevin McKernan, the geneticist, and he's got the sequence for both Pfizer and Moderna, and you can distinguish, now that you know where the protein is bound, where that spike is in the tissue. Now you can do genetic sequencing on that tissue and say, is this natural, acquired from, or is this from one of those two injections? So it's a kind of a complicated technique. Like I said, I used to have 80 employees. Now I'm just reviewing cases as they come in. And I still only know of a couple of labs in the world that are doing that spike protein staining. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, there is no excuse for any laboratory in the world not to be doing this now. Everybody has access to the antibodies. Everybody has the ability to order them. It's a standard technique that we've done in laboratory medicine for decades upon decades. And the excuse is they don't want to get in trouble for telling the truth.
So correct me if I'm wrong, and I might not have this right, but it's my understanding, said simplistically, that you could stain a tissue, whether it's heart tissue, brain tissue, lung tissue, and see all of these spike proteins, but the way that they stain differently, there's a different nucleocapsid. They stain differently if they're spike proteins that were generated from the vaccine versus ones that came off of the virus.
Yeah,
so that you can tell, no, those are spikes that came from the shot. Is that right?
Because if it were a viral infection, you would see the stain both for the spike and the ball, the nucleocapsid. You would see that as well, and that says natural infection. But if you stain and only see spike and don't see nucleocapsid, well, that spike came from somewhere and there's no virus associated with it. And then by deductive reasoning and Sherlock Holmesing it, you just say, well, And then you can do those further genetic tests in addition, but it's pretty much a smoking gun when you see only spike and you don't see the natural nucleocapsid part of the virus in those slides.
So it's been dishonest all along for them to say, well, we just don't know if this was because people, had the virus. They know darn well if they were willing to do the staining or talk to any credible pathologist like yourself, say that, no, this is gobs of spike protein that are in a particular tissue as a result of your toxic shot. I also want you to go back for a second because I am still fascinated by these clots. I know you and I did a show probably over a year ago with regard to those. Talk a little bit, when you show those long, not only does an average blood clot not get to 2 or 3 or 5 feet long, they don't look like that. They don't look like rubber bands. Talk about these things that we refer to as blood clots. They are in the blood vessel, but I'm not sure they're actually blood clots. What are they clots of?
They're collections of normal blood proteins in abnormal ratios. So a normal blood clot will consist of a certain ratio of proteins. And, we form I scrape my arm. I want to form a clot. I don't want to ooze all day. So my body's supposed to, lay down a scab. It's the clotting process, and then break down that scab over time, and you end up with a little scar. Great. That's just kind of normal proteins doing their job all day long. There's a great group out of, I want to say Australia, that's been looking at these. They're made up of normal blood proteins, but in wrong ratios, and they have a lot of what's called beta fibrinogen in them. And normally that should be a small percentage of a clot, and this ends up being like 45 to 50% of the clot. Here's the problem with that. We don't have medicines that break that down. And so these form bonds. These are like, in the plastics industry, these are polymers. And these, when we have a lot of bonds and interactions in the body, it's like a magnet, kind of attach, do your thing, unattach. But instead, these are locking together with a covalent bond, which means that these are like, tightly strung together. And instead of a magnet that you can push and pull, now you have something woven together. And to try to unstitch that is really, really difficult with the medicines that we currently have on the market. So it's normal proteins in abnormal ratios. And that's what's giving these things this thick rubber band-like feel. And here's what else is happening in many individuals, and the great work of Dr. Jordan Vaughn down in Alabama, Dr. Kell in the UK, and Dr. Pretorius in South Africa. They're finding floating amounts of tiny, tiny clots called amyloid-like proteins. And so not everybody's forming these big fibrous clots, but they're forming tiny ones. And there are laboratory techniques, a very simple technique where you can tag it and make it glow under the microscope, a thioflavin T test. And you can see if people have these abnormal amyloid-like proteins. Well, what happens there is they're not blocking the big vessels and forming these big rubber bands. They're blocking the small vessels. And then we see the microstrokes, or we may see microinfarctions in the heart, like a Swiss cheese pattern was seen in the hearts of several patients that died in Japan. When they looked at the heart, it was a highly unusual pattern we usually don't see in pathology or in medicine, under the microscope, just seeing this Swiss cheese pattern. And that's because all these tiny clots occur. So there are tests now where we can look for it. But again, there are too few labs doing it. And I think this is what we need to overcome in medicine. And you know this, and I know this, and most of the listeners do. We need to overcome fear. And as I've said, probably 1,000 times around the world as I've traveled now, you can't find what you don't look for. We have the techniques to look for these things. And we need to just start looking. We have a new director at the NIH that is more aware of some of these issues. And hopefully we'll get more funding to go towards these type of projects. We're looking in retrospect, but to your point earlier in the conversation, we're looking in retrospect so we don't repeat these same mistakes going forward. And so if we apply good science and known techniques or innovative techniques, we can prevent harm going forward to much of humanity.
Here's another question from a clinical perspective. These patients, and there are so many of them, who have clotting issues, quote unquote clotting issues, but they aren't, for all the reasons you laid out, the typical blood clots, but they are getting put on the standard anticoagulant therapies, whether it's heparin, Coumadin, these sorts of things. Is there any indication that those typical blood thinners, those typical things that we put somebody on, if somebody develops a blood clot in their lung or a blood clot in their leg or a blood clot, in their heart, we put them on these medications. But if it's that type of a clot, if it's these abnormal ratios, is there any indication that those traditional anticoagulants will work against these abnormal clots?
I know Dr. Vaughn and his research group have been doing a triple anticoagulation therapy that's helped a lot of patients function better and feel better. I haven't seen good evidence that the clots themselves break down, but I think you can control further formation and improve blood flow with some of that thinning. I think the question becomes, how many people have a residual sequence of the injected gene or the contaminating DNA plasmids that I know you guys have talked about on the show? Is there some integration into the cell or into the nucleus that's causing people to still make a little bit of protein? That's a good question. I don't know. It would appear so. Right. So yes, you can have some benefit from what I understand clinically from Dr. Vaughn and his group. But I think there's still a lot to be determined as to how one actually breaks these down long term.
And these are, as you and I both know, and I just say, I'm angry about it. These are the sorts of things that we should have known before the first injection went into an arm. There's a reason why the average vaccine takes 6 to 8 years to come to market, if it ever makes it to market at all. Many of them fail, during the extensive testing. Never before have we launched one of these things without having the most basic answers to these sorts of questions, like how long does it last? How long does the mRNA stay in the plasma? Those sorts of things. And I am still angry about it. Tell me this, how many patients have you evaluated, if you can put a number on it, for things related to COVID? In the last, I know you're been shut down in terms of your lab, but how many would you say you were responsible for evaluating?
Thousands. At the time that it all hit, I was doing about 40,000 biopsies a year and tens of thousands of blood tests. And then in the peak of 21, after the vaccine rollout, I was still doing 40,000 biopsies a year and thousands of blood tests. So, through the blood and through the tissues, I saw thousands of patterns. And so what a pathologist does is we put patterns together. What number is off? Why is that D dimer high? Why is this high? What's in this tissue? And so it's like going to the zoo and trying to recognize all the animals. And then all of a sudden you start seeing new animals and you're like, whoa, we haven't seen this animal before. And so thousands upon thousands, really, in terms of, the autopsy series, Dr. Burkhart has the largest series there. I've reviewed a lot of cases. I've stained a lot of cases. I'm kind of stuck right now trying to work with another lab that can do the staining so I can do the microscopy. So we're kind of working on a couple of research projects there. I'm way behind on a couple of those, but I would like to get those completed because I think we're going to find even more unfortunate findings. But again, any good pathologist their job is to explain what is out of normal. That's what we do. We think of normal, and then as we observe all day long, we're like, oh, but that's out of place. It's like that Sesame Street game. One of these things is not like the other. Which of these things doesn't belong? And so that's what they're supposed to do.
Right. So in addition to highlighting the massive number of cases that you personally have been responsible in reviewing, I want to ask you this question. What percentage of that massive number was children?
None. Yeah, zero.
Right.
Zero.
So back to the American Academy of Pediatrics wants you to believe that it is critically important that children get these shots because they're such risk. Yet one of the most prolific...
I can say this. I reviewed some children that died from the shots, but but none of the harms from COVID. But some of these sad autopsy cases I did review were children that were deceased because of the shots, yes.
And that's exactly my point. So they weren't COVID-related injuries in children. They were COVID shot related injuries. And I will continue to drive that home because that is the truth. And it's coming from you. You are the person seeing them. So you said you're the person looking at the facts, looking at the patterns. And the reality is it isn't just my clinical experience that I wasn't seeing kids sick with COVID. It's that the pathology wasn't there. You weren't seeing it either. And anybody that tells you differently is being dishonest, including, unfortunately, the leadership at the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it really is going to be interesting to see what happens now that we've had this change. I'm watching the clock wind down, and I do want to talk for a little bit just about, I could talk with you all day. We need to do another show. Tell Drew to stay out of town. I want to talk a little bit about where else you see things going at HHS. You and I both acknowledged before the show, it is clear to me that Robert Kennedy Jr. cannot necessarily do everything he wants to do, at least on the timeline that he would otherwise want to do it. If people thought that he was going to go in day one and just go off the market with the mRNA, it simply wasn't ever going to happen. And you and I would know that. But talk a little bit about the things he has done, because I think there's no question to me that he is absolutely making important, meaningful changes there. But I'd like to hear from your perspective.
Well, I support Bobby. I agree things aren't happening at the pace that a lot of the population would like to see. That's Washington. I grew up in that area. I understand how the swamp works. He doesn't have all the people in place he would like to have in place. So he still has holdovers from the prior administration. There are people against him that are very, shall we say, pharma-oriented. There are people that are entrenched. He's a very smart, strategic man. And I think we need to realize he's shifted the conversation to remove 22 contracts worth $500 million from mRNA. That's great. Do we need to get rid of self-amplifying RNA? Yeah, we do. There are things that still have to happen. Do we need to get rid of the platform altogether? Yes, we do. However, he is building, I think, building within the population an ability to question things that weren't questioned previously. And having spoken to several senators and congressional members, they say, look, until we hear the clamor from the grassroots, it's hard for us to do anything. And I think we need to continue to add our voices. There's too much infighting in the medical freedom movement. It's fine to disagree, but to try to tear individual personalities down does not accomplish anything. Bobby means well. He's doing good things. Look, okay, food dyes, that's important. Is it the ultimate? No, mRNA is. We get that. But it's a stepwise process. Any good lawyer is going to build a case before they take it to trial. He has that trial background. He has a great science background. He understands the process. And I think as more people do come into the positions he wants, he changed the advisory committee. I think that's a step in the right direction. He's canceled contracts. He's fired a lot of people that weren't doing good things. So he's getting there. I think we just need to be patient, because if he did everything in one fell swoop, they would remove him. Getting to certain people in the administration that maybe are the leader of the country and have the idea that Operation Warp Speed was the best thing ever, I think we'll get to that point. But, he has a chief of staff that I think doesn't allow him to hear the things that we know. I think once people hear the common sense, then those decisions will be made. So he's up against a lot. Yeah, I admire what he's accomplished so far, and I think he'll continue to do great things. And I think he merits our support, even if we don't agree with everything at the pace. But I think good things will happen if we all stay in the fight together. And I think that's the important message there on HHS.
I agree with you 100%. He's only been there 5 months, and he's done more in 5 months than previous HHS secretaries have done in an entire, 4-year term or more. So, and back to, the not insignificant issue that you and I were talking about. When I say you can't vaccinate your way to good health, you and I both know that the ultimate, really goal, the brass ring, is a healthy immune system, and doing things like removing seed oils, getting back to whole foods, removing pesticides, decreasing fluoride in the water. These are all things that really ultimately create a healthier, overall, a healthier profile. So it can't be all just about vaccines. Obviously, you and I know mRNA is the devil, but there are other things that really, get thrilled to see the fitness piece come back front and center. I've said for a long time, we need to bring, gym class back to elementary school. It was an important thing. We are far too sedentary, present company accepted, living on a farm. But is there anything else in the last little bit? So I'm with you. I say we continue to support Robert Kennedy Jr. I continue to be a fan. I believe he's doing the right thing, and I believe he's making meaningful, impactful changes, even if they are slower than I'd like. Anything else you would like to, for folks to get out there to know, or where they can follow you now that you're not in your...
I'm at Dr. Cole on Substack. And my website is the letter R, rcolemd.com. I need to update that. I haven't been on there for a while. And then on X, I'm at drcole, the number 12. And yeah, my final message is never give up hope, stay optimistic, get outside. My favorite vitamin of all is the sunshine. And, stay positive. We've got a blessed life here in this beautiful country. There's so many people that, are suffering. Let's not forget those that are harmed, but there's so much good we can do in the world. Let's do what we can for others. Let's continue to optimize health through natural methods, and let's continue to tell the truth no matter what, no matter the cost, and get the truth out there and be kind in the process.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Amen. You are truly a model, and I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you staying in the fight and everything that you've done, everything you've been through. As I said from the beginning, Titan is not hyperbole. You have my greatest respect and thanks. So let's do this again soon. I'm sure there'll be more for us to talk about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Victory. You're the best.
Cheers. Thanks. Okay. Well, I believe Drew is going to be back out. We've got some upcoming shows. Oh, on the 26th, Steve Hilton, one of my favorite people. You can see him there. And then Simon Godek with Roseanne. Chef Gruel, another one of my faves, coming up on the 28th. I did not know that September 4th was Drew's birthday, but apparently Salty Cracker is. So we'll have to put that on my calendar so I can remember to send him birthday wishes. And and then Zachary Levi and Gabe. How do you pronounce that last name?
Oh, I don't even know. I gotta figure that out soon. I'm just excited because the 16th, September 16th is my birthday, and we get Zachary Levi. He's a big star. We just found that out today.
Wow.
Yeah. Very exciting.
Okay. All right. So both of you guys. All right. Well, thanks for having me back. Great. Happy that everyone was able to join me. Ryan Cole is just, he's the goods. He's been honest from the beginning. He's seen it under the microscope. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And he lost a tremendous amount, and he remains spiritually and just oriented. He's got just a really great attitude, and he's got my greatest respect. So happy that we were able to have him. And thanks for joining me.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.